Hi, Demetria. I wanted to leave you some feedback on your rough draft. Overall, really nice work. I think that you have enough to work with in your or excuse me for your narrative. I think what I really want to encourage you to do and talk to you about is uh, pulling these ideas out. Uh, Expanding these ideas essentially, right? Expanding these ideas into a fully realized narrative. Um, so I like this idea that you're starting with. It's an interesting one because you seem to be saying that like we can all clearly understand the kind of broader scale discrimination, right? So for example, if there's a company that refuses to promote women of color, or perhaps they pay their female employees less than their male counterparts. That's the kind of discrimination that it's real easy for us to identify. Well, I mean, quote unquote, easy, right? But you seem to be suggesting that what is just as harmful, particularly for young people and the development of their identity, are those really small moments of prejudice and racism that aren't intended to be harmful but can be, right? So it's like when people say stuff like, well, I don't have a racist bone in my body. Well, and you're kind of pointing out, well, you may not think so, or you may not, you might assume, but how do you really know how all of your actions are going to be interpreted, right? So for example, with your teacher, um, I think that her intention was very innocent, but she put you in this really awkward moment, right? As a young person where you had to choose between identities. And how can you do that, right? You can't, right? That's so unfair. And so it's interesting that something just so as simple as you trying to fill out this form kind of becomes this, identity struggle for you. So and that's something that I don't think everyone will recognize, right? Maybe people that don't have this experience or identify the way as you wouldn't necessarily have this experience, and that's why these stories are so important. So one of the things that I see missing in this draft so far is the idea of place. So remember, one of the things that you want to do in this narrative is describe place in rich detail. And I'm not quite sure what place you're talking about yet. So, um, and I, however, I think with the content that you have, you can kind of figure that out. So, are you talking about what it's like to be a young person in 20th century America, right? Like, that's a place, particularly 21st century America that is really grappling with the sins of its past, right? So, and that's one of the things that your generation is really kind of tasked to take on, right? And it's not that my generation wasn't tasked to take on, but I was kind of sandwiched in between the civil rights movement of the 50s and the civil rights movement that we're having today, right? Um, so I think if that's what you want to do with place, that could work. But however, since so many of your memories that you're discussing here are related to childhood, maybe it's a town that you grew up in, right? Um, Maybe it's this school where you had this moment with this teacher, right? So one of the things that I want to see in this draft is a clearer discussion of place and how place led you to talking about these instances. So really, you have two narratives here, two little mini narratives. This moment of racism, I think, on the playground. Yeah, it doesn't say directly where it happened. So here's another place to expand and stretch out. And then this moment in school. Um, I'm not quite sure how to advise you on this because it almost in some ways feels like you have two separate stories, like two separate examples. So maybe if your place here is 21st century America, um, and what it's like to experience excused prejudice, for lack of a better word, like prejudice that people don't realize that they have. Um, and that's what you want to illustrate, like a series of those. I think that could potentially work. Another way that I could see this is you writing about one of these instances in more depth to illustrate this idea of place and how people don't always recognize their own prejudice and how harmful that could be. So more clearly establishing where you were here, like where this occurred, um, what you and the child were doing before this instance. Like, were you guys getting along? Were you guys at the park? Were you happy to be there? What specifically were you doing, and were you playing? And then at what moment does the mom step in and say this? Right here would be a wonderful it would be wonderful for you to use dialogue, right? So you can capture what the mom said. And then you can more clearly capture what your mom said when she came to your defense, right? So instead of summarizing all this, you can make it more immediate and concrete for the audience by putting it into dialogue, right? So really that's what I think I want to, because like this, for example, you used dialogue and it worked so well. So this, I think, could be stretched out to a full story too. So as far as that is concerned, I'm not quite sure how to advise you because ultimately it's your story. I typically lean on focus on one narrative, one story with the arc, but I could also see you stretching this out more clearly to have like a series of examples of these moments of prejudice that you had experienced as a young person. But I think what's really missing is that idea of place. So you definitely want to get that in here with this draft. All right. I'm really looking forward to seeing where you take this. These are great little mini narratives. I think you've captured what occurred so well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do with your descriptive writing and what you can do with that arc to make that connection with your audience on a deeper level. Good job.